Hello, everyone, and welcome into our panel, Headline Media Deals, Converting Viewers to Customers. We're so pleased that you could join us for a bit of time to discuss this important issue in how the U.S. sports betting market is evolving and developing when it comes to some of the major media deals that we've already seen between big companies in the United States and sports betting operators, sort of the challenges and the opportunities within. And of course, we have some more to discuss that are on the horizon as well. We have a fantastic panel for you today. Let me take a moment and introduce everyone for just a moment before we get into the discussion. Jeff Grutula is Executive Vice President and General Manager for CBS Sports Digital and CBS Interactive. Nicolina O'Rourke is CFO for NBC Sports Regional Networks, as well as the Senior Vice President of NBC Sports Enterprises for NBC Universal Media. Benji Levy, President and COO of theScore, and of course, theScore Bet platform as well. Joe Iannarella is Senior Vice President and General Manager of Sports Betting for Bleacher Report. And Chris Perrone is General Manager for USA Today Sports Media Group. Thank you, everyone, for a bit of your time. And let's just get right into it now. And I'll start with you, Jeff, because your name's first on the list. All right. Let's start with from the top and talk about the evolving space here when it comes to these major media deals and the rush to acquire customers and convert them for operators, and maybe a little bit about your experience when it comes to CBS, and I know the partnership that you've developed here with William Hill.
Sure. So I'll start there. So yeah, CBS Sports has engaged William Hill in a sports betting partnership that makes William Hill the official sportsbook wagering data provider for CBS Sports across all platforms and exclusively digital platforms. So for us, we've been obviously watching the space evolve over the last couple of years and trying to understand how we fit in with our audience that we've built, the 60 to 80 million monthly engaged users that play fantasy, that have a propensity to bet. And so we've been looking for a way that we could engage with a partner to help unlock that audience. I see this is right. We're still in the first innings. Like it's early. There's just still a handful of states that are untethered, legal. And we expect that's going to be increasing quite a bit over the next few years. So I think right now we're trying to find a partner that'll help us figure out how to unlock our audience, how to derive value from the assets that we built, and really ultimately prepare us for I think what's going to be a long haul that we're all going to build new businesses on top of this emerging market.
Fantastic, Jeff. Thank you. Nicolina, we know that NBC has a deal with PointsBet, and from everything we've seen reported, it's an interesting structure that has a lot of different facets. I'm sort of curious how that came together, and maybe you can share with us some of the plans for how NBC will activate that deal.
Sure. Similar to CBS and William Hill, when we spoke to PointsBet, we really wanted to bring all of our assets to bear in terms of really getting into this space. Right? We've been looking at the sports betting space for the last few years since the repeal of PASPA and trying to figure out the best way for us to participate sort of across our entire portfolio. There's a few ways that we think that sports betting can really add value to our business, right? And this is sort of what we're all going for, which is better consumer engagement on the IP that we already have, better ad sales demand for a new category that's coming in, and the ability to maybe at some point participate on the operating level and really participate in a growth space. And so when we entered this process of finding a partner, we wanted to find someone who is going to create that pathway for us, as well as help us monetize our assets as they exist today. And so that's what is so multifaceted about this deal with PointsBet in terms of structuring it across both NBC Universal and Comcast, all of the assets and the footprint and the reach. We are a very regional business on the Comcast side, on the regional sports network side, and we're really activating that partnership there first. In addition to that, we have all the digital assets and between RotoWorld and live streaming. And, really at some point, I think the holy grail for us is how do we get into in-stream action, right? And so we're sort of looking at that long game and seeing if PointsBet in the long term can be that partner to help us get there.
I think that's a great point and kind of rolls into, I think, a natural question for you, Benji, to talk a little bit about the integration that you have with the Score Media app and the Score Bet, where you've been trying to convert customers from that media app, from the large user base that you have, and give them an integrated experience in many different ways. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I think for us, it's an interesting word that keeps coming up, and it's the word is conversion and user acquisition, and for us, it's not about that at all. I mean, I think when we look at the landscape and we think about how does sports betting fit, it's just one part of the overall fan experience, and it's been that way for a lot of years. It's been that way pre-PASPA. A lot of our fans on our media app were betting on sports before PASPA fell, and when we think about how and that was kind of the driver for when we're thinking about how do we approach this. We went through the same consideration that Jeff and Nicolino went through. Do we approach it from an advertising perspective? Is this something we should be looking at from an affiliate perspective? But ultimately, our view was that kind of minimized the impact that this could have on our audience and on our business. And so when we think about it, it's about how do you to us, it's bringing the bet to where the customer is, not thinking about how do you take the customer from our platform to another betting platform where the betting operator is thinking about how do I try and add content and streaming and things to retain the customer on the betting platform. For us, we flip it. It's totally the opposite. It's how do you create as much of the betting experience and bring that to the user where they already exist, where they're already engaging around the content, where they're chatting with their friends about sports. How do you create a fully immersive and integrated experience, and also do it in a way that is totally respectful of a lot of the users who aren't interested in betting on sports? So it's been a very interesting kind of challenge for our engineers and product designers about how do we approach this and how do we tackle it. But so far we're pretty happy with the results, and kind of looking forward to building. Because as Jeff said, we're very much in the first inning of this thing, and it's going to grow and evolve. And 3 years and 5 years from now, it's going to look nothing like what it does today.
I wish I could buy stock in the baseball metaphors we all use to discuss this. I've heard first inning, second inning more often than I could say, hey, I'm a baseball fan. I don't mind it. Joe, let me throw it over to you for a second, because I think Benji went into an area that crosses over very well with what you do with Bleacher Report, and talked about going where people are, where the engagement and where they're already chatting about things. And we know that Bleacher Report, as part of the Turner family, has been heavily engaged in the social space. How do you see that space evolving when it comes to sports betting and engagement?
Adam, I think you've summarized it fairly well. At Bleacher Report and Turner and our parent company, AT&T, we're not necessarily looking to be the sports book. We're looking to maximize engagement. And for Bleacher Report, our point of differentiation tends to be social. So we're looking at it a little differently than some of the other companies may be. For us, it's less transactional, one-way in news and information, and much more how can we build community and interactivity that kind of reflects our value system within the company. So getting opportunities to partner with multiple companies, both FanDuel and DraftKings, they have some shared values. They're mobile forward, they're younger companies, social first. It kind of reflects our audience and vibe. So I think that's where we really feel we have an opportunity to connect at the social level and really build engagement and wins hearts and minds in the path to conversion.
Great. I think that there are many angles and many directions to come at this from, and I think that's a great way to ask Chris about the USA Today media group that some people probably know, some don't, that it's much more than just USA Today or Gannett. There are a lot of properties within that media group in a lot of different ways, I would think, to consider engaging the sports betting space.
Yeah. Hi. I love this group of people and the assets that everybody brings. It's quite different. And it's really interesting if you think about from a sports book operator perspective, why they would partner with each and what they bring to the table from audiences and distribution and engagement. It's really cool to hear about it. And so across USA Today Sports Media Group, we really think of ourselves, we kind of pitch it on three things. We're national, local, and vertical, and we have assets and audiences across that. So USA Today Sports, everyone knows, great print and digital that covers kind of the national trending news around sports. And then Gannett, which is the parent company, a traditional kind of newspaper company, owns over 260 local properties. So we have really highly engaged local sports fans that subscribe to their local news and really follow those trusted voices locally. And then we have a vertical group of kind of vertical sites, team-based, player-based, or kind of league or sport, like an MMA junkie, that's focused on specific sports verticals and really passionate audiences who love a specific sport, a league, a team, or even a player. And so that's how we've thought about leveraging it. And we have a pretty significant partner in BetMGM who kind of really aligned with that approach more strategically. It wasn't just a kind of this affiliate deal that I think we see out there where people are just willing to pay for a new referred user, but we're able to talk with them about their objectives. What states are they moving in? What local assets or audiences do we have that match their strategies? And then clearly in the end, these books do want to drive new subscribers and users, but I think it's more about the engagement and how do we actually teach people. The U.S. is pretty new at this, and U.S. sports audiences are rabid, but I'm not sure that they understand even the basic lingo sometimes. So I think that's one thing we've tried to approach is educating. Some of these sports gambling is still taboo in a lot of places in the U.S. And so how do we educate consumers to understand the lingo that's getting used? So and the numbers, right? And people don't understand sometimes the difference between a money line or a spread and things like that. So that's part of our goal, I think, is we have these trusted local communities. How do we educate them and make them more comfortable around sports gambling, and what does that mean, and have it not be such taboo or confusing about the risk of loss and what they're going to, how to manage that.
Chris, I think that's a great point. I'm the managing editor of Legal Sports Report Day to Day, and we cover the industry from a very inside perspective, but I also do some work with the VSiN Sports Betting Network. And when we are educating people, I don't know that we always take into consideration the person, like someone who walked up to our studio one day, which is right outside the sports book, and knocked on the door and wanted to talk to someone because they wanted to ask what the minus in front of the number meant. And you're taking it from that very basic perspective. And so I kind of want to throw to Jeff and to Nicolina, and I'll get out of the way for you both to discuss this. But I'm curious, in terms of all of the different channels that you have to reach people, whether it's over the air, the various digital opportunities that you have, how do you work with the different audiences that you see in those channels with the goal of converting them into customers?
Good question. So for us, it's about engagement. It's about talking to sports fans in an authentic way. And similar to what Benji said, we've been thinking about this space even pre-PASPA in the sense that our audiences always loved our picks content. They've always been into the content that's skewed more gambling. So we're just continuing to do that. We're continuing to do more of it. I think to the other point that Chris made, we're also thinking about places where we do reach maybe more broad-based audiences. We do have some more educational type content that's out there where we are trying to introduce terminology that people don't understand in pockets where it may not be as hardcore. And so it really is sort of, we've got different assets that play different positions, that have different types of audiences. The fantasy one's going to be a little bit more knowledgeable. A lot of the other content that we have that's more general sports will incorporate conversation. Will team A win versus team B, right? A lot of this stuff is just like basic sports conversation. Is team A better than team B, and why? And so we're just sort of now starting to introduce some of the odds and some of the information, some of the data points that take these conversations that are natural to sports fans and then bring it to the next level, right? So that's how we're thinking about it. A lot of it's just kind of how do we take what we're doing, do more so, integrate intelligently in places where we can teach fans more, and just continue to do more of what we have been doing in some ways.
Yeah, and just leaning into what Jeff is saying on authenticity and sort of building it into the content that we already have. So same thing, which is we've had Roto World for 20 years. And that audience, knows the space, news and information, they know the lingo, and it's just sort of extending them now that they can actually take action, right? And it is very few states today, but this is going to, the other beauty of this space is that it's growing at a nice measured clip where we can sort of grow along with it. And we can educate people as we go. So the product offerings that we're all going to offer here, it's going to grow, it's going to get deeper, and it's going to get more integrated with our partners. And we just are able to offer our audience more options and more ways to engage. On the linear side is where we're doing some of this sort of education and sort of embedding of what we like to call wagertainment, right? It's the glass of wine that makes dinner taste better. It's responsible gambling, right? It's not a whole bottle of wine, right? And so it's that balance and us sort of, it's to Jeff's point about the lingo and sort of, when you get into deep analysis, it gets fun. And then it's about, hey, are you willing to put $1 on that, right? And it's about the people you want to hang out with when you're watching the game and just put a little skin in the game. And so you'll see in our markets with the regional sports networks, we have storylines where we talk about the spread and we talk about, but we're talking about it more from a prop bet perspective, right? Because that's the dollar bet. And we're focused on the casuals because we think the long game here too is getting more people engaged in trends, stories driven by trends, and then therefore taking a little bit of action on that trend. And so that's sort of how we're looking at the linear audience, which is a broader mass market audience where the language is different. They're in it for entertainment. And so we want to engage them that way. But the guys who are interested in tools and creating systems for making picks, we've got that for you too.
That's a great point in terms of not only the varied audience you have, but the short game versus the long game. And I'll throw this out to the group for anyone who wants to take a run at it. But obviously, the end goal is converting into customers, but there are obviously very different types of customers, right? That casual versus the person who wants to be, in air quotes, sharp better. So how are we measuring success in the short term? And then how are we starting to look toward what success in these deals will look like in the longer term?
This is Chris. I'll step in a little bit. We're being part of a kind of a traditional news, we're not going to get into the game. We're not going to get into an ownership game. It's just not part of our strategy. So we think about it probably differently than some of the other partners here who really either have formed their own books or partnered very closely with ownership, taking a stake. So I think our definitive success might be a little bit more about short-term users, right? And thinking about how do we convert them, because that shows success to the sports book. And they may partner with us in many ways. That's media spend and sponsorship and media ad dollars and also referrals and cost per acquisition. But I'm not thinking about necessarily the long-term value of those users. I'd push that risk to the sports book to do that because I don't have an ownership position, as opposed to some others who think about they're certainly in it for the longer game because they've taken a risk position or an ownership position, and they are worried about the LTV of those users and how they get a return on that investment. So quite different, I think, strategies that can be implemented.
I think, Adam, the alignment of interest actually is a very good and interesting point here, because when it's set up with kind of sports book on the one hand and media company or media platform at the other, you can ultimately end up with very different alignments of interest. You can have short-term user acquisition. That's great from a revenue perspective from the media company in the near term, but in the long run, people have differing objectives. It's kind of not dissimilar to what we saw. Our history is in the television broadcasting business in Canada, and we lived here as a linear network during the poker craze, and was a little different in Canada than it was in the U.S. But we would like the amount of advertising that was spent on our network from the Full Tilts and the Poker Stars back in the day, in the launch of poker, was absolutely breathless. And no regard to ROI and CPA. It was great for us as a television network, but then, over time, what you'd start to see is, it wouldn't be the companies buying it direct. Now they're buying through media agencies, and all of the typical traditional discipline that goes across selling advertising to traditional advertisers gets brought into this. And so it will be very interesting to see how this shakes out from kind of these breathless kind of headline deals that we're seeing today to the midterm and the long term, where people are focused on, what are we doing from an ecosystem perspective? And we're trying to take the approach right from the gate that it's not just about how do I get a user of the Score media app to bet on sports. It's about, what am I doing to engage and retain them, over time, right from the outset? How do I make that an experience, and how do I make betting part of our ecosystem it's not just about getting them to sign up for an account and make a deposit. It's about what am I doing along the way to help make this easier for them, more engaging for them. As I'm designing my box scores, what are we doing to make it easier for them to transact and give them more touch points in the media platform itself, so that it's not just about kind of a one and done, but built into our kind of core experience from the get-go.
And echoing what Benji said, I also think it's about building brand loyalty and credibility that can then transition to have kind of the halo effect for the sports books, that they can tap into it, shared narrative journeys and experiences that can become a thing and can be owned or create original IP. I mean, everyone has a line on every game and there's no really differentiation. But if you can create some level of differentiation in people's hearts and minds, an example we used, because we try to introduce, our mainstream sports fan base to casual sports betting, when we looked at a sport like baseball, it didn't necessarily resonate with a younger demo. So as opposed to ask someone just to bet the line of the game and follow every single team in the league, we honed in on one narrative journey. We called it NERFY, no run first inning. And we were able to make a very low threshold for a community to come in, whether they were hardcore or not, to participate. And then it created merchandise opportunities, NERFY Nation. People felt like they were a community. And then it has the opportunity for that book to partner with you to kind of own that unique differentiated narrative, to create a destination point where people want to bet that there because they feel like that's the home of something that exists beyond just the short-term ROI.
It's really smart. I love those ideas. I think one thing we all have to be cognizant of is that these audiences are pretty immature here in the U.S. So, a lot of times we're partnering with or working with executives or people who've come from the UK market, which audiences are very experienced. And so you go to a UK sports site and there's tons of data, right, being thrown, and there's widgets to place bets and things. I think if you put that experience in front of a US consumer, they're going to be easily annoyed and confused. And so kind of slowly working in, instead of maybe data and numbers, there's graphs and visuals and different ways, I think, to engage it where it becomes enjoyable for the user. And I don't think we're at the hardcore stage yet, generally, for our audiences. But and so thinking about how we engage them to really drive that engagement and do fun things like you're talking about, Joe. Benji, I love the Score app. That's one I've used forever. I use it because I love data. And so I love digging in even before the stuff. So there's an easier transition, I think, for those users who are used to data-driven stuff. So a lot of work to be done, I think, on UX from our standpoint and how we engage these users from what they experience to making it more fun and enjoyable. Like, what's the game within the game? And the other thing we haven't gotten to, I think Joe is getting there a little bit, is like we haven't even gotten to really the in-game betting, right? Which is going to become really interesting. And does that make younger fans interested in baseball now? It's pretty boring if you're young and you're watching baseball and they take 20 seconds in between each pitch. But right when you can start to gamble on that, the 20 seconds becomes valuable because that's time to actually formulate. The data comes out, you can get odds on it. So pretty interesting opportunities as this evolves.
I couldn't agree more, and I want to throw that actually right back to Jeff and to Nicolina, since we had that discussion. I'll start with Nicolina, since you mentioned the streaming opportunity, and the streaming opportunity obviously goes right along with the in-play opportunity. What is the approach that you're taking right now with the NBC and PointsBet arrangement? So
part of the reason why we liked PointsBet was they own their tech stack. If you talk to them, they'll say they're a technology-first company, right? And that's meaningful to us in that, we've launched Peacock. We're getting into the streaming wars just like everyone else. And the question sort of becomes, they're all a little bit the same. I think someone said that on this call. And so how do you differentiate your consumer experience? What are the things you can add to it to Twitchify, gamify, make it more engaging? We have a lot of disparate engagements. We have NBC Sports Predictor, which is now also in partnership with PointsBet. It's a way to play along. It's a lot like HQ, right? It's free to play. You don't have to know a whole lot. You're just making picks. But it's that it happens before the game. nothing happens during the game. And there's a lot that we could be doing during the game, exactly to Chris's point. And it's very interesting about baseball because, baseball can also get repetitive, right? So how do you sort of, you got the 20 seconds, you got the latency issue. There are things that we have to solve on a technology end that when that gets solved, this gets to be a really interesting space. And once you get into the end game, there's a lot more you can do from a content perspective because the additional storylines that come out of it become much greater. And I think it doesn't just apply to the sports space. I mean, obviously in the EU, they're talking about the US election. We're not doing that here. But people are citing the odds on the election. And people do this for, pre-produced things are a little difficult, but you can have these conversations about anything. And you're really talking about gamifying the consumer experience.
The odds turned out to be more of a predictor than the polls did, right? If you paid attention to what the odds were, they actually were a better indicator of what's actually occurring right now than any of the traditional polling was. Pretty fun tidbit.
Jeff, we've made multiple mentions of the overseas market and some learnings from there. And obviously we mentioned the election. That's primarily an overseas market. You have a partnership with a UK based bookmaker, at least in terms of their origins. What do you think we can look at in terms of the UK or the European experience in terms of translating that to the US?
Well, one, live betting. I think that's the one we've all mentioned. I think that's clearly just a matter of time. It's got to play out. And we're looking at the ways that successes they've had integrating into their products, into their streams. I think for us, we're thinking of it kind of two buckets. We look at it sort of an opt-in approach where it's like we have our CBS Sports HQ for us is our 24/7 streaming sports network. Has a strong gambling bent to it. Audiences opting in there, whereas games, live games and everything, we're going to walk it forward. It'll be a little more slow. We just want to be careful. Some people don't want it as part of their experience. And so we've just got to be really careful, I think, as we're integrating. I think as we look overseas, we do certainly see pendulums swinging around where maybe people went a little too far. So we just got to walk it forward. I think the free games are a nice way. You can kind of get people to opt in. You can find the pockets where people want to learn more, where you can engage those audiences, but we all have to be careful just not to, I think, kind of ruin this by acting recklessly.
In the broadcast space, it'd be, this to watch the different streams, right? If you just want to watch the game, you have one view. If you want increased data, you got another. If you want the sports gambling aspect, you're able to tune into a different channel. That's going to be a lot of fun to be able to switch between.
Right, there's a lot of lessons overseas, successes and not successes. So we're just trying to understand how it plays out. And again, because this is a real long game for us. So we're gonna play it cautiously.
Well, that leads us into what I'm going to consider our lightning round here, because I'd love to go for another hour with everyone, but we're starting to run up against our timing here. So I'll give everyone the opportunity, and let's go ahead and start with Benji, and we'll make our way around. When we're looking at this conversation, let's say a year from now, if we come back and have Sports Betting USA panel here again, how has the discussion evolved in terms of customer acquisition when we're here 12 months from now?
So I think a year is probably a little tight. I think you're still going to be seeing, just based on the pace of rollout in the U.S., you're probably going to see another half dozen or dozen states roll out. I don't think you're going to necessarily see people's approaches, moderate or change in that period of time. I think there will be some interesting learnings about people who are focused more on an advertising and acquisition approach versus people who are operators who are able to take that deal or relationship with the media company and approach it on a bit more of an integrated basis, depending on the platforms they're able to access and how they're able to do that. I think you'll start to see some separation in terms of the results that these operators are being able to generate.
And following up on Benji, a year might be tight, as he said, but I think the major factors we're looking at is the growth of mobile. I mean, look at the explosion in New Jersey and what that's done for the industry, and how many states adopt the capabilities for mobile and geo-targeting and all the elements that kind of fuel growth. And the 5G and latency issue. You know, the explosion of this industry comes with the ability to live bet in game and then tie that to game broadcasts. I mean, that's where the real explosion comes, where any casual person can sit down for any minute from their couch and play along with the game. Will that happen in a year? TBD. It feels a little aggressive, but I think that's the ultimate goal that we're all working towards.
Yeah, and feel free to widen out the horizon from the 12 months that I threw out to whatever you think might be the next evolution of this. Go ahead, Chris, as we make our way around.
Yeah, I think 12 months is pretty quick, given the state-by-state regulatory. So things are moving much slower here, and it's rolling out much slower. I think one of the key points in the U.S. is the top-level branding that these books need to do. So maybe a BetMGM is pretty well known because they've had the casino land-based properties and hotels. So consumers are more comfortable. Maybe some of the emerging brands like a PointsBet, they need to come in and establish that they're a trusted brand. They're new to the market. And so consumer maybe is a little more hesitant to put money into something like that than that. So I still think the marketing aspect and kind of telling consumers who you are, what you're doing, what your platform stands for, that's going to continue to be important. And then I do think the big jump, to Joe's point, becomes in-game betting, mobile, where you're sitting on your couch watching the game and you're able to quickly, calculate the data and place bets while the action's moving. And American sports are there's a lot of downtime in American sports. I think they're uniquely set up to have in-game betting, but we're not there yet from a technical standpoint. It's going to take a couple years.
Yeah,
Nicolina or Jeff? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the interesting dynamic I'll just throw in here into a year out from now is as you look at the downward pressure on the regional sports networks and what's happening there, and these networks that carry a load of content when it comes to in-game action, what happens to those rights will potentially catalyze the ability to increase in-game action, right? Because these are the guys who produce the games, and these are the networks that are under pressure, and these rights at some point I think will be up for grabs. And then that potentially changes the game, whoever holds those rights. And you could be seeing operators coming into the rights bidding market.
Jeff, anything you want to add to those crystal ball predictions?
Yeah, well, for us, next year is just get smarter across the organization, content, product, design, marketing. We're going to be launching new innovative content products with William Hill. Try to expose that brand more and just engage our audiences. Just keep building engaged audiences around our games, our social content, our apps, podcasts, newsletters. Just keep going and just get smarter, figure out how to convert them and drive value to a sportsbook partner.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating discussion to have over the next few years, and I can't thank all of you enough for sharing some of your expertise with us today. And we hope to have this discussion with you once again in the future. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.